This is Computing Up, conversations about computation writ large, with Michael Littman and Dave Ackley. This episode was recorded February 15th, 2021.
Hi, Dave. How you doing?
Hey, Michael. I guess I'm all right. How are you?
Good, thanks. So we've talked to two Heathers in a row. I assume you have a Heather for us to talk to today?
Well, you know, I don't. I can play Heather, but I am not actually bringing us any guest at all this month. Yeah.
What's going on?
Well, I don't know. I mean, mostly I just didn't get around to doing my going out there and finding cool people to join us. But also, I don't know. I've been feeling cranky. We was cranky about theory before. This is sort of another thing. This is kind of I'm glum about technology and by implication computer science and by implication like even the work that I'm doing like that, as far as whether it's really going to help society or whether it's going to help more than it hurts. I don't know, something like that.
Okay, that's pretty heavy. Maybe we should take some time to break that down.
Yeah.
So, all right, so help me understand. So first of all, what's wrong with society?
Well, you know, the thing that sticks out to me, as it seems like always, is whatever the most recent big change is the thing that tends to get focused on. So in this context, I'm thinking about the consequences of the information technology and the internet and social media and all that sort of thing, all of which are just the latest iteration of the same gossip and bad-mouthing that's been going on since human language emerged. But it feels like it has its own extra special risks and bad properties again now.
Yeah, well, sure. And so, I mean, it very much has the capability of, well, like a lot of tech, it lets things be done at greater scale and more efficiently. So if you take something like rumors and innuendos and hurting people's feelings and you say, hey, let's scale that up and make it more effective, that's not a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, so like free speech versus hate speech, you know, or that kind of thing. At some level, that's impossible to resolve because it requires, you know, looking inside the heart of people to really know intent and so forth. And we want to encourage people to be able to talk, while at the same time we don't actually want to encourage people to be examples of dickheads. You know, we would rather that if someone's acting like a jerk, other people can call out that person for acting like a dick, so that it doesn't get amplified, so that it doesn't get spread. So, well, that person could say it, therefore I can say it, and then we end up in this sewer. So I don't know. And again, it seems like we haven't got the balance quite right, especially with this whole in the social media land about how it's all about attention and eyeballs and clicks. And the easiest way to do that is by being outrageous. And so that is a fitness function that optimizes for outrage. And here we are. And so that's a problem. And
so, okay. So I was hearing you say you were concerned or depressed or dejected about the possibility of technology solving these problems. But it sounds more like what you're saying is technology is creating these problems or amplifying these problems or making these problems become unresolvable, which feels even worse.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's better in a sense if it means that the problems didn't originate at technology's door. So they say, hey, people badmouthed each other over the back fence, so why didn't you go thought police the back fence or whatever? But more is different. Scale matters, all that sort of thing. So for sure. I don't know if I can explain this, but let me take a shot at it. There's also a bigger problem than this. I mean, I've talked about that before, but there's a problem of, I think, the way we think, the way we describe the world around us, the way we describe reality. And one of the ways that we describe reality a lot is in terms of, here is a situation, and we imagine that this situation has some extent. It's my house, it's my city, it's my room, and it has some properties, and I describe it. It's got good, bad, whatever it is, and I tell a story in that situation. And there's an implicit sense in which this situation can be likened to other situations elsewhere. It's generalizable. It might not apply to everything, but from first look, you could try to put someone else's room in someone else's city in someone else's country and see how it applies to them. And it's supposed to be useful in some way. But that very act of saying that this is a limited situation that's supposed to be movable, that this description is supposed to imply in multiple places, carries with it some sort of assumption of independence or some sort of assumption of uniformity of the places that it can go. I mean, not strictly that, because you might plop it down someplace and it might not apply very well, but there's a sort of a first principles assumption that a description here should be a description there. And my problem with it is, once the descriptions get really big, like people on Facebook, or people using the internet, then there's really no place to move it. It's everything. The length of the description covers all of the stuff that we can imagine it covering. Like that. I mean, we could say, okay, we need Facebook on Mars. We need internet on Pluto. But that's not happening anytime soon. And what it means is that this assumption of independence, that this assumption that there's a sink where consequences can go, the assumption that there's something outside the room where food can come in and waste can go out, or power can come in and heat can go out, and I can view this room as an isolated system that couples to this thing I don't have to care about. Once the system becomes really big, like the entire planet, then it's not clear that I can do that. And now it's all the internal properties of it that is what really matters. But people keep talking about it as if there's an infinite world outside, and so the classic example, or one classic example, is Greta Thunberg's point about the fantasy of eternal economic growth. Where is that supposed to come from if the world is finite? And yes, Elon Musk is going to take us to Mars and so on and so forth, and that's one great story. But the other side of it is that no, once the sort of correlation length, once the amount of description reaches across the entire amount of space that we have to use as the subject of that description, then the rules change. But we keep on pretending they don't. We keep on acting like economic growth can happen continuously, or that technology can always make it smarter, and so on and so forth. And I'm not saying that technology is almost done, or we're totally hopeless, but just that there is this exploitation opportunity where we can take advantage of people thinking in an open system sense, that there's some place to dump the waste, that there's some place to get rid of the excess heat, even though in fact the system is so big and so centralized that there really isn't. That makes me glum.
All right. So I am not quite with you yet. There's a lot of abstract concepts in there that I'm having trouble grounding them. So you're talking about excess heat and waste. So I relate that to, well, like where do you dump your garbage if you're a town? But I could also relate it to if you're building a chip, like you have to get rid of that excess heat someplace,
Right.
and it's not on the chip. It has to be off the chip. So there has
There
to be
has
an
to be an
off.
outside. There has to be an outside that can take this.
Right. So are you getting at the idea that because we're all connected now, there isn't an outside, and so that changes how we have to think about everything, like how we
Yeah.
think about growing and how we think about pooping, it's all
Right.
in our town now.
That's a big piece of it, and it's the sort of the life cycle versus the open ended like that, and just this whole idea that there could be something like a landfill that you can keep filling and filling. That can't be right. Eventually, in the long time limit, unless we can keep filling up new planets and moving on, that must not be true.
Yeah.
And so I guess
sustainability feels like a phrase that comes up in this context,
for sure. And living systems, ecological systems, when they're even anywhere approaching imbalance, have everything tied off. Everybody's poop is food for something else, like that.
Because I was going to say that life systems definitely poop outside themselves, right? That is part of how life manages to get done with things. But you're going to say now, Gaia or whatever, right? If you think about the planet as a system, everything goes someplace, and there isn't any waste.
Except for actual waste heat. So we get high energy photons from the sun, and we need to bleed off low grade waste heat from the planet somehow.
Okay.
And because, second law of thermodynamics, if you don't pump the system, it's going to go to equilibrium. So the sun is pumping us, and nuclear metals are pumping us if we want to dig them up, use them that way. So that's the one that doesn't go away. The waste heat doesn't go away. And so people talk, you say, well, what if we had an, infinite supply of free energy? What if we had absolutely safe nuclear power or anything? I don't care. You just make it up. Gazatz energy that's absolutely free, and totally non-polluting. You can't get away with the fact that when you run the motor, there's going to be waste heat. You can't get rid of it, and you're going to have to get rid of that somehow. And so that's the whole system view versus the open system view.
Okay, and now are you applying that concept to something other than Earth? Are you applying it to, for example, I don't know, like societies?
Certainly the way of talking that implies there's a way to dump things that no longer have to be worried about applies at all scales. We flush the toilet, we take out the trash, whatever it is, at all spatial and temporal scales. And it's more or less true. On the one hand, it can be part of a closed system. There's a recycling facility down the road that's going to factor out all the available stuff and send 75% of the rest of it to the landfill and so forth. And that's one thing. But then there's larger things where nobody really knows what the heck to do with it. So that's an issue. And partly the fact that the cost of that is not built into the cost of the product. So when you have an open system, where you have a place where you can dump all this waste, then you can sell it for cheaper because you didn't actually have to do additional chemistry to reduce the waste to something that isn't so dangerous and close the loop and so on. So now there's this economic incentive to claim it's an open system, to hide the consequences, and then say, hey, 10% off. Get it while you can.
I feel like people use the phrase externalities in this context, right? There's sort of this notion that everything that you're doing, to the extent that it has an impact on something else in the system, that you should be responsible for that cost.
Right. And yet nobody's doing it. Everybody's ignoring their own negative externalities and yelling and screaming about somebody else's and saying, well, you move first, you make your stuff recyclable, then I'll make my stuff recyclable or whatever it is. And that's not true. And completely, not completely. There's plenty of people who are green, and green is growing and all that kind of stuff. And that's great. But it feels like, mountain, molehill, it's way out of proportion. and at the same time, this sort of greenwashing thing. And I guess that was the thing that, like we talked about a little bit with Heather Lynch, as far as, offsetting the cost of her trips to Antarctica and stuff, and just even be a person who's thinking about that and recognizing the cost. To me, that seems, very admirable and very modern and not all that common.
Sure. But even that has its limitations because you're still generating those issues. You're just admitting that you're generating those issues, which is
right.
A step, but you don't want that to be the last step.
Exactly. It's kind of a Band-Aid, but it's better than no Band-Aid, like that. Yeah. And so I don't know. Sometimes I feel like as a society, we could understand this stuff more clearly. We could find better ways to explain it. We could get the next generation coming up like Greta and all the folks. And in this context, I rope in the woke folks and the cancel culture and all that stuff as being a net force for good, because they're working with trying to make it clear where people are cheating, where people are essentially being hypocrites without admitting it. They're claiming that free speech is what they want, but actually they just want their speech. They're claiming that equality is what they want, but really all they want is their privilege, and so on. And that's great. And the more we can actually even that out and make it actually symmetric, then the better, I think, and it's all to the good. But then, I feel like the planet is going to hell so much faster than these things are likely to help that I get glum.
Yeah. I mean, that's the big glum, right? I mean, sort of the fate of our reality, right? It's not even just like, oh man, this is going to be a tough week because of the pandemic. It's like we're hosed on a cosmic scale.
This is going to be a tough planet for the duration.
Yeah.
You go, and I suppose it's not really true. I don't think we're going to put ourselves extinguish our species, although, we might.
We're capable of it.
Yeah, well, I don't know if we really are or not, but certainly I think we're close. And we could do some, CRISPR-9, 28 generations, remove time bomb kind of thing with a gene drive to force it into the entire population, and then 16 generations out, everybody falls over, whatever. So I believe we're close. So now I'm asking myself, well, what's my problem with this? So, okay. So things are going bad. There's going to be crap all over the place. Everything's going to become much more expensive. Everything's going to be polluted. Everybody's going to die young because they're breathing all this incredible sewage that we pumped into the air and blamed it on somebody else. Well, so what? Either the human species goes out or it doesn't. And, either way, why is that my concern? But I don't know. Somehow it feels like it is my concern.
I mean, sure. I mean, the only way to make it not your concern is to take some kind of cosmic or, like evolutionary or cosmological perspective that just says, look, the machine is just winding down. Like this is what it does. It's inevitable. But to the extent that we can keep ourselves, I don't know, productive and happy longer, that would be a positive, right? So because that's us.
Better lives for more people, for more days of goodness. And we should try to increase that number. We should try to work toward that.
Right. And to the extent that we're even wired that way, like this is a drive that we care about, it's gonna matter to us.
Right. Yeah. Well, so yeah, I guess. I mean, I could argue that we're wired to care about ours. We're wired to care about our family and maybe the dippy cousins, but that's about it. And to get to the point about caring about all mankind, or even then go beyond that about all life kind, all earth kind, like that. I don't know that we're actually evolved for that.
Well, I mean, I would say that we're evolved to form allegiances to people who are not necessarily kin. Right. In a way that I think for some species that's not even an option. For us, we can take in strangers and bond to them. It's not a trivial process, and it doesn't always take, but we're perfectly capable of it. So it's in us to do that. And I think the the pattern over the last, I don't know, hundreds of years has been towards more of that than less. But but
Well,
I think
that's good.
it is still a race, right? Between
Yeah.
how fast can we all become friends against how fast can we extinguish ourselves.
Right. And how fast can we understand our obligations as members of a friend-making species, members of a friend-making culture, and allow them and knuckle under to the rules of not being a jerk, because part of being in friend-making culture is that you can be shunned for being a jerk. In the bigger picture, that's why we succeeded, our tribes of Homo sapiens or whatever, because we were able to go beyond just immediate kin and to make larger groups based on other allegiances. I guess part of the story is in the land that we evolved in, there was, I assume, always an other. There was always a not our tribe.
So this is what I was wondering when you were talking about things outside, like a place for waste, that there's a sense in which there's also others who are outside, and it's not that they're waste, but they play a role. The fact that they're outside of the organization or whatever,
right,
and that you can expel people into that outside is a different game. Sometimes I think about this in the context of, say, like the libertarian worldview, where I feel like the libertarian worldview says, if you don't like what we're doing, then you can leave and go into another system, and they don't have the obligation that say a government has in an inclusive society to deal with everybody, right? Everybody, including the people who you just wish you didn't have to deal with. No. They're your responsibility too. And when you draw that circle to include those people, you get a different set of rules and a different set of questions than if you're able to just like kick somebody out of the club.
Right. Or if people are just able to walk out and find a viable alternative, find a way to actually live in some other system or whatever. But then, just as you say, you do that, then 6 generations later, they come back for revenge, and now there's thousands of them coming out of the wastelands or whatever it is. So
I like that use of wastelands.
Yeah, because then, so I guess. Yeah. All right. Well, so what's my bigger point here?
Okay.
I mean, this is good. It's not exactly helpful, but maybe it's helpful a little bit. But actually, my complaints are even bigger than this. Okay. And part of the complaint is that we think that thinking can do more than it can. We think that we can reason our way to solutions. And they might not work 100%, but they'll work 95%, or they'll work enough that the parts that don't work will be manageable, will be tolerable, because the benefit will be so great. And that's the thing, another thing that really I worry about sometimes, that it seems to me that in order to do reasoning, you need to have concepts. And typically they have words or phrases or descriptions, but you have something like concepts, and you have something like consequences of arrangements of consequences. Ball moving towards window, consequence, window may break, that kind of thing. And reasoning is the process of taking those concepts and rearranging them to say, okay, now we have broken glass all over the place and the ball is over there. And then what happens after that? And it's incredibly powerful. It's, along with being able to make friends with non-kin, the ability to reason out farther than the other guy, faster than the other guy, more accurately than the other guy, is why we're here. But at the same time, it has these incredible inherent limitations that concepts are never completely crisp. They always have gray areas. Even if you start in a nice, clean, this is the best example of a sneaker I could possibly imagine. This is the platonic ideal sneaker. But then you start saying, okay, well, what if I paint it differently? What if I may put a hole in the shoe? What if I change the laces to Velcro? And just start going and going and going until you end up with a toaster, or something like that, and say, hey, it's a sneaker, right? We started with a sneaker. And that there's an awful lot of reasoning out in the world, and a lot of it has a sort of arrogance to it that, hey, look, I proved it. I said, here we are, X, Y, Z, A to B, B to C, C to D. You must believe D. Like that. And a lot of times people don't want to believe D. A lot of times D might actually be ridiculous, but they can't actually point out any particular flaw in the process of going from a sneaker to a toaster, like that. And they end up just saying, well, I know what a toaster is, and that's a toaster. That's not a sneaker. And that's a lot of the exploitation that we see, where people pretend to say, oh, I am concerned about sustainability. Look, scientists said, palm oil is the best oil. It's the most environmentally friendly, so I will destroy all the rainforest to plant palm oil trees. That's one of the ones that stuck in my craw from a while ago.
Yeah, I remember that
4 or 5 years ago. Yeah, like that. And science gets co-opted in that process. It becomes part of the story of A then B, B then C, therefore destroy the rainforest to plant palm oil plantations and make me incredibly rich. And once again, I've explained away the externalities by saying it's eco-friendly, something like that. And I just feel, as I'm getting old and cranky, that I see more and more science that can get co-opted that way, can get used to make an A to B to C to D, therefore pass a law saying I can do whatever for bad ends. And
have you ever read the Tao of Pooh?
I did a long, long time ago. What brought it to your mind?
Well, so one of the themes in that book is that there's kind of rabbit thinking and there's Pooh thinking. So Pooh is he is with the Tao, or I'm not going to get this exactly right.
In the Tao, whatever. Is
that he kind of is harmonious with the world around him, and Rabbit is like super reasony, and he thinks things through, and he gets to ridiculous conclusions, and then he acts on those ridiculous conclusions. And Pooh never does that, right? Because the consequences are still part of the process for him. And if it's ultimately going to make him, I don't know, not get to eat his honey on time, then he's not going to follow that chain of reasoning. He's just going to reject it.
Yeah.
And I think, and many people like me, sciencey kind of people, are more rabbity than Pooh-ish. And it was hard for me to read that book and hear that somebody thinks that rabbitness is not ideal. It's not the ideal that we should aspire to, because obviously it is. Because who needs people who have muddled thinking?
Who needs people who just want to accept things as they are? Then there's no reason to do science, because the whole point of science is to learn something we didn't already know, or to make a connection we didn't already have. No, that's very good. And I mean, as far as trying to say, okay, be more pooey, or at
brings
least
us back to the waste discussion. Sorry.
At least, I mean, put it this way. As I have retired from academia and I'm working on trying to make an actual example of this alternative that I don't think we've seen before, a different kind of information technology that will have different downsides, different risks, but also different advantages. And I do believe that it has some striking advantages that we haven't really understood, which are the duals. The flip side to the striking costs of the information technology that we've already built. But a lot of times I wonder, well, but is actually trying to do engineering like I'm doing the best way to do that, the best way to make the world go? And maybe the answer is more like, no, one should be more like Pooh, number one, or number two, be more like the guy that wrote the Tao of Pooh, which I bet took some rabbity kinds of processing to actually produce that book. So there's got to be some meta story that, how many novels does Pooh finish in a year, like that?
I'm going to say zero.
I would think zero.
And
Too
I don't
much
think
honey.
It bothers him because
too
that's
much
not
sunshine.
Yeah.
Right. But yet we think, you brought up the Tao of Pooh, and I remember it, and I enjoyed it. I thought that was good. I thought it was insightful. Like, well, or Finite and Infinite Games. That's another book which I think is a absolute amazing, stunning little thing that everybody should read, in first grade. And it's still not as widely known as I think it should. But
why
that's
don't
the
you
same.
blurb it? Because I don't know if I read it, but I definitely have heard you or maybe George Furness talk about it. The sort of notion that you can frame an interaction as being like, this is going to run for a little while and there's going to be a winner and a loser and I should be a winner, versus this is going to run over the long haul and will continue to run and we need to find a way of making this work together.
Yeah. So I think the opening sentences of the book are, there are at least two kinds of games. One could be called finite, the other could be called infinite. The purpose of a finite game is to win. The purpose of an infinite game is to continue the play. And that's it. It just unfolds from there.
Right.
And when you win, you get a title, which is yours forever. The 2021 Grump of February 15th award, whatever it is.
You're in contention for that, I heard.
I think I'm really waiting for the call, actually. I don't want to jinx it, but
the thing is they call on Sweden time, so they wake you up in the middle of the night.
Well, not for me. I don't sleep in the middle of the night, so it should be just perfect. But I sleep other times. It's okay.
Just not when Sweden people are awake.
Just in case.
Yeah, you got to be ready.
And whereas the purpose of an infinite game is to continue the play, and so you have to optimize for that, which means sustainability, which means not being a dick, which means bringing in more folks so that the game is as big as possible, because that'll make it more robust, and so on. And so to me, the Tao of Pooh, finite and infinite games, those are two examples of things which I think get at a lot of the good side of things, the way we need to be more like. But the making of those things, the writing of the Tao of Pooh, the writing of finite and infinite games, you do not get a book that tiny without cooking that text for decades. Or I don't know. Cars, I have no idea how long he spent writing it, but so I don't know. So there it is.
Yeah.
There were reasoning processes that went into making both of those things, even if they end up carping in some sense more or less gently about the limitations of reasoning processes and finite thinking and winning and all that sort of thing.
Right, but they didn't completely divorce themselves from those processes. They actually exploited them to get their point across that reasoning isn't the be all end all. But I think that's the thing. It's balance, right? Balance in all things. So here's a slogan. I have a little slogan thing, which I think I started keeping slogans because you kept slogans, and I was trying to have my own slogans because you have some really good slogans. So this is one of mine. I say the body unencumbered seeks equilibrium. The mind unchecked prefers extremes. And I feel like it's that kind of like, let's see how far we can push this. Let's find the edges. Let's just go out, is what minds just love to do. That seems to be what they're about.
They're
but
they're
like
bred
bodies
for.
don't love that. Like bodies want comfort and
They want to be right in the middle.
in the middle, right?
Yeah.
That's right. And so if you're kind of more a body like I didn't think of it as a rabbit and Pooh thing, but like it kind of splits a little bit like that. That Pooh is very body centered, and he's about the comfort and making things, and being sustainable, being in the infinite game. And Rabbit is like, let me get, here's my goal is to like stop Tigger. Let's figure out how we can stop Tigger, because that's going to be that's going to solve the problem forever, which of course is nonsense.
Tigger is too loud or too bouncy.
Too
or
bouncy,
that's
right.
Too bouncy. So that's the thing that needs to be solved.
Right.
Right.
That. And we have to do both of these things, right? We don't do well without bodies, and we don't do well without brains, right? So it's like these guys have to find a way to get along.
Right. Yeah, and that's so. Well, number one, balance. Radical moderation, like that. Radical centrism, moderation in all things, including moderation, so there needs to be a distinction that. If we look at the Tao of Pooh, if we look at finite and infinite games, we say it's possible to use reasoning processes to equilibrium end. It's possible to use them not to encourage more extremism, but to encourage more balance, to help restore a balance at some space-time scale rather than disturb a balance. And there's other reasoning processes which are actually not designed for that. They're designed to make things more different, not to be homeostatic, but instead to take us to a new regime where, Jeff Bezos owns everything rather than just almost everything, or something like that.
Yeah.
And so maybe don't shoot the messenger. Maybe it's like reasoning is not the problem. It's where you go with reasoning.
Right. If you let reasoning run the show, then that's going to be a problem. And I think that's the Silicon Valley ethos, right? Is like, hey, wait a second, we're really good at this. We're going to not only run our companies that way, but we're going to make sure our companies make the world run that way. Right. And that has fundamental limitations that maybe aren't being talked about enough.
Yeah, that's a good conclusion to me. I mean, and again, it's not just Silicon Valley. I mean, it's
sure.
Titans of industry, the people that tell the progress story too loudly, too proudly, without saying there's always a cost, there's always a wasteland, there's always a landfill. So we want to see how we can get the bang for the buck rather than just right. to Mars and beyond. Like
problem
that.
Solved, right?
Exactly.
The whole notion of problem solved is a problem.
Yeah, that's right. Problem solved. All right. Well, I don't know. I guess I feel a little better.
Let's see if we can kind of cap it off maybe by saying, you're down on technology to some degree, and I think that's fair. But you were also down on your own research, and I was wondering if you felt like some of these things your research is implicated in some of these things, or you feel like in some ways your research is trying to push in a direction that would balance the boat a little better.
I wanna think the latter, but I feel obligated to consider the former.
Well, because you're responsible, and I appreciate that.
Well, yeah.
But just like you talked about finite and infinite games, like one of the, you have a lot of slogans associated with your work. So I'm not saying I'm capturing it perfectly with this one slogan, but one of them is indefinite scalability. And so one of the ways of thinking about indefinite scalability is infinite game, right? This is a thing that can go on forever.
Yes.
How does that change things if the machine is everywhere? And I think that you are trying to take into consideration this kind of broader view. It's not easy.
Yeah, that's true. No, thank you. That's true. And certainly the conceptual framework that I come to, indefinite scalability, ends up really coming out sort of first and foremost, that if you take that seriously, it will lead you home. It will lead you to good things. Because the idea is in an indefinitely scalable system, there can be no externalities because
at least
everything
computational externalities. Because I think you still have heat sinks.
I have my indefinite scalability has 4 inputs, okay. Power, cooling, real estate, and tiles, hardware, like that. So those have to be given. If you run out of power or cooling or real estate or hardware, you can't grow the system any further. But the claim is if you have those 4 things, then nothing can stop you. You can go as far as you want, and the infinite game can get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And yeah, I was talking to somebody the other day about one of the metaphors I used in a paper was that, this indefinitely scalable machine, constructing it is like building out the ballroom floor after the dancing has already started. Like that. So, the computation is all these people swinging around and interacting with each other and bumping into each other and forming line dances and doing whatever, while the underlying substrate has no limits at all. As long as you got power, cooling, real estate, and more tiles, you can keep on going. And certainly as I've worked through it, it's been true that all of the things that when I look at finite architectures, that somewhere they lean on centralization, somewhere they lean on global synchronization, and it always comes back to bite them. And so now, like, we've got like DNA computing, and people are actually working on stuff where they can, build solutions and pour them together. And I talk to them, and I say, well, so how do you read the output, or whatever it is? And they say, oh, well, we just take a sample and we put it in the PCR and it turns blue, or, whatever the heck it is. And, you focus on that. You focus on where the output couples to the rest of the system, and you say, aha, so now it's incredibly fragile, right at that point where you have this tiny little thing. And they say, yeah, but, well, for purposes of writing the paper, it was good enough, like that. And I get it. And the science is sort of super cool. But from a systems point of view, it starts to get a little tiresome to see these, fragile, stupid, finite tricks being used around it so that you could predict up front where it's going to go wrong. That if someone took this idea and actually deployed it, it's going to go wrong right here, just like all these others did before. So now I've muddled the waters again. We were making progress towards a happy ending.
Well, but I think that what you're saying is that they're not grappling with the real distributed issue, and so because it's hard, and that's why the work that you're doing is not done yet, right? Because there's a lot of implications of accepting that as a premise.
Yeah, and I really believe, as I wander around the internet and see all of these little things, people focusing on green stuff, people focusing on sustainability, people focusing on the quality of conversation in the public square and stuff, and so like Glenn Weil, who was interviewed on an earlier episode of Computing Up, he's been sort of tangling with the rationalist movement guys coming out of, not just guys, but coming out of Silicon Valley a lot, largely, which is very much kind of about the arrogance of reasoning, like that. And that too, all of these things feel to me like, Blind Men and the Elephant for this alternative, for the infinite game, alternative. But everybody's using their own different language with their one little metaphor, and I feel like there really needs to be a framework that we can, a lingua franca, that we can say, yeah, what you're doing there is pushing back against premature synchronization, and premature synchronization is the root of all evil, like that. And everybody always says it. You say, well, step 1, let's centralize everything. Right. Step 1, all the packets go to Facebook, and then we'll decide what to do. And that's a great step 1, but it's a terrible step 1,000 ending point. There we are. Yeah. All right. Well, we don't have an excuse to yak on because we haven't got a guest this week, this month. Well, anyway, thanks, Michael, for letting me vent.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you've let me do the same on previous podcasts, and it's I think it's stressful times. I think that we're actually in a position to really think about these long-term implications, and we're seeing where the systems that we've trusted in many ways for so long are giving out on us a little bit, and that makes us see see how bad things can get.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on the one hand, right. Certainly, to me, one of the stories of the pandemic is that all of these efficiencies that made somebody billions of dollars before are now causing the shortages and the increased infection rate and bad outcomes because the redundancy, the resilience has been squeezed out of the system in the name of efficiency, like that. So for sure. And the political situation and the decay of truth, the decay of respect for truth in the public discourse, that's really scary. Yeah. And the whole, we are our systems, we make it themselves. They are more fragile than we think. They're tougher than we think too. But I'm waiting to see, how can I help? How can we help toughen the system up and get the truth squad gaining membership, something like that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, step by step, day by day, we'll do the work, and we'll talk again.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Michael. This was Computing Up. Thanks for listening.